Hey guys, my name is Karan and I'm the founder of Socioh. And today we're going to talk about iOS 14 and its impact on Facebook advertising. This is a very large and a very complex change, so I've tried to keep this presentation very founder focused. We're going to keep this very narrowly focused on e-commerce advertising on the Facebook ads platform. And if you have any questions, please shoot me an email and I'll be happy to answer. I will spend a little bit of time on the technical details of the issue itself and then answer questions that we've been getting from our users. And yes, we will discuss in detail how your ads performance will be impacted with these changes and what you can do to better prepare for that. So far, apps have been able to collect all the data that they wanted and there was no need to get user consent. And if a user wanted to opt out of this, they had to do it themselves and hardly anyone did it. Going forward, this changes with iOS 14. Apps have to explicitly ask users if they give them permission to track and profile them. And the concern is that most people will opt out of it, and it's not clear what impact it will have on audiences, ROAS, and ad performance in general. Let's start with understanding how Facebook's data collection and tracking works today. And this will continue to work the same way for all non-iOS traffic as well as for users who've opted in to share their data with Facebook. So in this example, if I, Karan, click on an ad, Facebook generates a new ID to track my click. And all the data related to my click is stored against this click ID. It's also known as FBCLID, which really stands for Facebook Click ID. The main thing to note here is that all the data that is collected is stored against each individual user, which is Karan in this case. Now, what this click ID is really a long string of characters that can uniquely identify each and every click across the Facebook platform. And Facebook stores all the details of my activity against this click ID in their backend database. And this is generated for all clicks going out of the Facebook platform, and this includes organic clicks and paid clicks. Now, as I click on the ad, advertiser's website opens inside of a browser tab. The first thing to note here is that this click ID is sent to the advertiser's website as a part of the URL. Same way UTM parameters are sent to the advertiser's website if you added them in your URL. Now, on the destination site, as the site opens, the Facebook pixel code loads. And this reads this click ID from the URL and saves it as a part of a cookie inside the browser. After that, the pixel continues to do its job as it did in the past. It tracks all my activity on the website via events. Things like page view event, view content event, add to cart and purchase event. With each one of these events, this click ID, which was stored as a cookie, is sent back to the Facebook servers. So now Facebook knows which ad got the click, who clicked it, what website they went to, what products they saw, what products they carted, and what products they purchased. So all of this tracking loop is completed with the help of that Facebook click ID. Let's understand what changes with iOS 14 for users who opt out of the tracking. So the step one remains the same. Facebook is still allowed to track all your activity inside of their own app. So they can continue to personally identify me and record my click ID against my personal ID. On step two, even though the click ID will still be shared with the merchant's website, Facebook can no longer tie my activity on the merchant's website to my personally identifiable information like my user ID on Facebook or my name. So even though the tracking with the pixel will continue to work like it worked in the past, Facebook has to completely anonymize my activity on the merchant's website and de-link it with my personal ID on Facebook. This is what changes with iOS 14. To summarize, Facebook still is collecting all the information that it collected yesterday. However, my activity on the merchant's website can no longer be linked to my personally identifiable information on Facebook. That part of my activity has to be anonymized by Facebook going forward. Now, Facebook and the entire ad industry has been preparing for these changes for a couple of years now. So let's see what Facebook has done to deal with it. When I land on the advertiser's website, the merchant has no way of telling who I am. But the minute I make a purchase, as a customer, I've just told the merchant my name, my email, my shipping address, my phone number, and all my personal details. This data is collected by the merchant's e-commerce platform on behalf of the merchant, and this is the merchant's first party data. The merchant can choose to further share this data with Facebook, which is the merchant's marketing partner, and that sharing is governed by the merchant's terms of service and privacy policy, not by Apple's terms of service and privacy policy. So, some of you may have heard of this thing called CAPI. Let's understand what that is. It stands for Conversion API. CAPI is this backend method by which Shopify's servers can share the purchase data back with Facebook on the merchant's behalf. Now, while I'm browsing the merchant's website, I may be anonymous to Shopify, but once I've made the purchase, I've shared my personal information with the merchant and indirectly with Shopify. Using CAPI or Conversion API, Shopify further shares this information back with Facebook, of course, with the merchant's permission. To quickly recap, by setting up CAPI, merchants are authorizing Shopify to share their first party data back with Facebook on the merchant's behalf. Now, there are a lot of concerns and questions about the future of cookies, browsers blocking them, ad blockers blocking them, and other privacy issues related to cookies. The sharing that is happening using CAPI on the backend is not at all dependent on the user's browser, so this is actually a pretty future-proof mechanism. So how do you configure CAPI? Well, Shopify's new Facebook sales channel app makes it a breeze to set up CAPI. So please go ahead and install it. And once you've connected the right Facebook assets, all you have to do is go to the settings and then click on the data sharing settings. Our recommendation is to set this setting to maximum. So most amount of data is shared back with Facebook, and it improves the chances of Facebook being able to identify your buyers, and that later helps you with your lookalike audiences. Now, one important step that merchants should take is to ensure that their terms of service and privacy policy is up to date and it's in line with how they plan to use their data. Not only does Facebook require it, it's also a legal risk for you if you don't do it. One question we're getting a lot is, if I've set up CAPI, should I remove my pixel? And our recommendation is no, please don't do that. And there are two reasons for it. The main reason is that Facebook can actually remove duplicate purchase events between the ones that are sent from the pixel and the ones that are coming through CAPI. And you can see this information in your events manager. And the other reason is that CAPI so far only sends the purchase events. If you remove your pixel, you will actually lose a lot of data that so far, even though anonymously, Facebook is still collecting. So it seems like nothing's changed. Facebook is still getting all the data it used to get, and there is a workaround to get more data from the backend. So what is all this fuss about? Well, actually a lot has changed. It's just not as dire as people are making it out to be. So let's look into it. Attribution is going to be the biggest change. The way Facebook reports its ads analytics and data has changed big time. So let's get into that. In the past, the default attribution window on Facebook was 28-day click-through or 1-day view-through, which meant if somebody's clicked on your ad and they make a purchase on your website even up to 28 days after that, maybe they did a Google search and came back, or if they saw your ad on their phone or online and within a day if you made a purchase without even clicking on it, they will attribute those sales back to this ad campaign. This is changing going forward. Facebook has shared this slide in their webinars. Going forward, the default attribution on Facebook is going to be 7-day click and 1-day view, and eventually it will just change to 7-day click. Now, needless to say that the 28-day click-through attribution would have led to higher ROAS than a 7-day window. One really important detail to understand is that this doesn't mean that your actual conversions or sales would drop. All that it means is that earlier, Facebook could add sales or conversions for up to 28 days, and now they can only do it for up to 7 days. So the reported ROAS is going to look worse than it did in the past. And that's actually why Facebook's so mad about it, and so are a lot of other ad professionals. So how much ROAS loss can you expect due to this attribution window shrinking? And this varies from account to account. So for your specific account, what you have to do to know the answer to this question is go back and look at data last year. Actually, anytime before 19th of Jan this year. Facebook used to track and report all of these attribution windows separately. So you can select 28-day click, 1-day view, combine that, and compare that to 7-day click 1-day view attribution, and you'll know historically how much ROAS you would have lost had that attribution window been smaller. On the Facebook slide, you'll also see most of the attribution now is either modeled or partial. So let's take a minute to understand that. Let's say I saw an ad on Facebook, but I did not click on it. Now, the same day, perhaps I got an email from the brand or I searched for it on Google. I went to their website and I completed a purchase. Now, this is 1-day view attribution, but because there was no click ID and Facebook can no longer track me on the merchant's website individually, especially when I didn't even click on it. So how will this attribution work going forward? Well, that's where modeling comes in. Facebook is going to statistically model this conversion under the 1-day view through attribution. And that's just a fancy way of saying that they're going to do machine learning and guess which ad campaign should this sale be attributed to. Now remember, the merchant site still has the pixel installed. There's also data sharing happening via CAPI, so Facebook knows Karan bought it and I showed the ad to Karan. There are also other signals like the IP address, Facebook's login cookie, timestamps that can help them model this conversion. They just can't use this information to identify and track a particular user or their device across apps and sites. So there are many such scenarios where reporting is going to get really complicated. And to deal with all of these various situations, Facebook's introducing a new way to report called aggregated event management. It does two things. One, it uses machine learning to track events instead of purely relying on direct clicks, user ID or device ID as it did in the past. And second is, it's going to limit the total number of tracked events to just 8. Earlier, you could track a lot more events. But now this limitation is being put so that the whole thing is a little bit more manageable for Facebook. So the bottom line is your reported ROAS is going to shrink. And one of the big reasons is going to be due to the attribution becoming much smaller. Now let's talk about the main question that's on everyone's mind. What does this mean for my ads performance? Specifically, will retargeting still work as well? Will prospecting campaigns be profitable after the iOS changes? And the answer is yes. Yes to all of them. Just because Facebook can no longer track unique users and devices, it is definitely going to shrink the audience size for retargeting. And yes, the ROAS will drop. And one big reason would be the attribution window changes. But there is also some data loss, so it will impact retargeting performance a little bit at least. Regardless of what happens with the audience size, the one part that merchants still control is the creative. Now, merchants spent a lot of time, money, and energy getting their product photos right. However, the Facebook product catalog doesn't give merchants enough control over the presentation of their own products in the product feed. Socioh's branded catalog solves exactly this issue. Here's an example of how a Shopify Plus merchant transformed their plain feed on the left to a very well-designed feed on the right. The creative resonated very well with their audience and the ROAS showed it. If somebody would like to give it a try, we have a 30-day no questions asked guarantee. If you work with us and don't find any improvement in your ROAS, we'd be happy to refund your money. So let's talk about prospecting performance now. As we discussed, you are going to see a drop in ROAS, and that's just because of attribution. Overall, what impact these changes will have on lookalike audiences' efficiency is not yet known, but I am inclined to believe that there won't be a huge impact, but honestly, it's a bit too early to make that prediction. To prepare for this, Facebook is recommending that merchants move towards what is called value optimization and away from conversion optimization today. So let's take a look at that. To understand value optimization, let's first understand the changes that Facebook is recommending. There are 2 steps that Facebook recommends that merchants complete as soon as they can. Number 1 is to verify their primary domain. And it's a pretty straightforward process. You can find the instructions inside of Business Manager or on Socioh's blog. What this does is it confirms to Facebook that you are the owner of the domain where you're collecting the data from. And the second change is also very simple, but it's the more important change. This is related to Facebook's move towards aggregated event management that we discussed earlier. This second change is what enables accounts to transition towards value optimization. Essentially, Facebook is reducing the number of events that it can track to a maximum of 8. And the reason for this is that it's harder to model and predict a lot of events as they transition to aggregated event management. Now, Facebook does allow merchants to select the priority in which they want these events to be reported. You can find the instructions on how to do it on Socioh's blog or also inside of your Business Manager. I highly recommend that everybody complete this step as soon as possible. This is the setup that we are recommending to Socio's users. If you notice carefully, we've switched on value optimization right next to the purchase event. And this is all that you need to do in terms of setting it up, but let's understand it a little bit. So of the 8 events that Facebook allows us to configure, value optimization alone needs 4 events. Let's understand why that is. And actually, I've configured here it to be 5 events, but 4 is the minimum number of events that are required for value optimization to work. Very simply, what value optimization means is that Facebook, instead of prioritizing higher number of sales, it will favor conversions where the customer may spend more money with you. Essentially, it enables Facebook to go after more valuable customers who are more likely to spend a higher dollar amount with you. So why does Facebook need 4 purchase events for value optimization? Well, the reason for that is Facebook is going to look at your purchase range and divide it into 4 sets, and they call them value sets. Each value set gets its own separate purchase event. So 10 to 15 buck sales, as you see on the screen, would get purchase event 1, and $15 1 cent to 20 bucks is going to get purchase event 2, and so on. With the new Apple restrictions, even though Facebook can't individually track me, they can definitely anonymize my data and assign me one of these value sets. And then their algorithm can use these value sets to further do matching for prospecting, as well as figuring out where to spend the retargeting dollars. So my feeling is that this is going to work very well, but there may also be some counter cases where you would still be better off using conversion optimization over value optimization. So what else can you do to prepare for this change? Well, the whole thing is about data. Most merchants already have a lot more data than what Facebook does, and that is their first party data. They just don't put it to work as well as they could. So a couple of things to remember. Facebook only retains 180 days of data, but as merchants, you've got your lifetime purchase data that you can really put to use. So I'd like to show you a few things that you can do to better use your first party data as a merchant. I'm sharing some slides from my merchant training deck for Socioh merchants. But if you find them useful, let me know and I'd be happy to record a video of these slides. So as you already know, you can create custom audience from your order data, and it's a really good idea to also include the value column in your customer list, which is typically the lifetime spend of a customer with your store. But customer lifetime value is not really the best metric to tell Facebook about the worth of a customer. If you dig a little bit deeper into this data, you'll notice that in this example, our stellar customer is actually already lost. They've not been back to our site for over 5 years. And the one that would be the worst customer in the list has had multiple purchases and is also a recent buyer. And this kind of analysis is called RFM analysis, or recency frequency monetary analysis. What you do is you give a customer weightage based on all 3 factors and not just lifetime spend. Internally, Facebook uses RFM analysis to make value-based lookalike audiences from their pixel and catalog data as well. So we know this really works because Facebook has adopted it as a standard. So the correct thing to do is to better score your customers using an algorithm like RFM, so the real worth of your customer is properly represented to Facebook. Recent engagement and purchase is a far better indicator of customer affinity to a brand than the total lifetime spent. So Socioh has its own proprietary RFM algorithm that has been changed to work with even small sets of data. Usually this does require significant data volume, but I highly recommend that you think about a better signal than just the lifetime spend. You could also do a rudimentary RFM just using Excel if you want to give that a try. Another way to get more out of your data is to segment it. Don't upload the complete list as one, but instead create multiple segments across multiple dimensions and then use those separate smaller segments to create lookalike audiences. Now, this makes sense for merchants who have at least 30 to 40,000 transactions total in their lifetime. It's harder to make meaningful segments with less data. You could segment customers around spend, purchase frequency, geography, but most importantly, their category affinity. And our Socioh merchant training actually goes over all those ways in which you can add value to your customer list and then use the subsegments to create lookalikes. But there is another advantage of taking this segmentation approach, and that is you get a much wider reach to your qualified customers if you were to take very focused segments and then create lookalikes out of them. So in this example, instead of the sports store taking all their buyers, I've just segmented them out into people who've bought yoga or golf equipment and then created separate lookalikes. Now, if one were to take a union of these 1% lookalikes of these four segments and compare that to the 1% lookalike of all buyers, your reach to your qualified customers will be significantly higher. But even more important than that is the fact that if you take just your golf buyers, create their lookalike and target that with a golf creative, you're just bound to do better than just a diluted signal of all the buyers across all categories. And our last slide. Will UTM still work? Yes, that's not changing. Will you still be able to make social media engagement audiences? Yes. As you've seen in our slides, Facebook can still collect all the information about your engagement inside of the Facebook app and inside of the Instagram app. And with that, that's all I had for today. If you have any questions, you could reach out to me on Twitter. You can send me an email. You can comment below and tag me, and I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.